Bright Cutie. Every student matters.
Hi students, welcome to the session. In this session, we are going to start with the new chapter, that is reproduction in animals. In our previous classes and the previous chapters, we've already studied about the different kinds of life processes that are present in a human being and are important for the sustenance of an individual organism. What are these? These are digestion, that is your nutrition, respiration, right, transportation, excretion. All of these processes are important to maintain life in the living organisms, be it your plants or animals. But there is a particular type of life process, that is reproduction, that is quite essential for the maintenance and sustenance of a particular species on the earth. When we talk about an individual organism, reproduction might not be important for the survival of that organism, but for its species, it is very, very important for the individual to reproduce. Now imagine if there is only one individual of a particular species. Let's take an example of a dog. Let's say that there is just one dog left, and on the whole planet Earth there's just one dog, right? Eventually, when the dog will die, the species of the dog will be extinct. That means it will not be there anymore on the planet, right? So that is why we see that reproduction is very, very important and forms one of the basic life processes that is important for the continuation of life on Earth, right? We've already seen that reproduction occurs in plants as well. There are different methods in which the reproduction takes place. So when we talk about reproduction, it is essential for the continuation of a species. Whatever species is there, it is always important for it to reproduce because it allows the continuation. For example, you must have heard about the species, those are vulnerable, those are endangered, those are critically endangered. Many a times these critically endangered species are critically endangered because there are very less individual of those species, and they are not able to reproduce, or they are dying because of one or the other reason. Recently, few of the species have gone extinct because they were just last living organism or living individual of that species, and it was not able to reproduce. And what happened? And when it died, the whole species got extinct, right? So that is why reproduction forms a very, very important part, so that the continuation of a particular species can take place, right? So what does reproduction ensures? It ensures the continuation of similar kinds of individuals, generation after generation, right? So one after the other, when the reproduction takes place, the continuation of that particular or similar kind of individuals take place. That means when I say similar kind, so dog will reproduce and the offspring will be a dog, right? Cat will reproduce and the offspring will be a cat, right? So similar kind of individuals, right? Now we've already talked about the reproduction in plants, and we saw even in the plants there was an importance of reproduction there, and plants also employ different methods to reproduce, right? Now we are going to talk about the different methods of reproduction in the animals, and we are going to study in detail how human beings reproduce, and we are going to talk about the different modes of reproduction. So when we talk about the modes of reproduction, first of all, we are going to perform an activity where we are going to write down the names of certain animals like human beings, cat, dog, butterfly, right? You can also write down the name of different other organisms like hen, cow, frog, etc., right? And then what you are going to do is you're going to write down that what is the young one of that particular organism called. Like in human beings, we know that organism, that the young one is called as the baby, right? In cat, the young one is called as the kitten, right? In dog, we call it a puppy, right? When we talk about butterfly, we call the young one as caterpillar, right? Then when we talk about the hen, we call it as chick. For cow, it is calf. And for frog, it is tadpole. Now, once you have filled the table, you will observe that there are certain organisms which have a very different kind of, say for example, you must have seen kitten and you must have observed that how kitten looks similar to the cat, right? But when we look at the caterpillar and we look at the butterfly, caterpillar resembles a kind of worm. Similarly, if we talk about the tadpole, it looks like a kind of a fish instead of looking like a frog. So there are differences over here itself. You can see there are differences that how the different organisms are reproducing, right? If we talk about say hen, we know that hen reproduces through eggs, right? So whereas if we talk about human, if we talk about dog or kitten, they directly give birth to the young ones. So over here within this table only you are able to see how different organisms are different from each other whenever we are talking about the method or the mode of reproduction, right? So now, so when we are talking about the mode of reproduction, there are two modes of reproduction. First is the asexual mode and other is the sexual mode of reproduction. Now, you have already studied about the meaning of the asexual and sexual reproduction in the case of plants. We saw that in asexual reproduction, no gamete formation took place, right, in the case of plants. Similarly, in the case of animals, only one parent is involved, right? Whereas when we talk about the sexual reproduction, we saw that in the case of plants, there was formation of male and female gametes. Similarly, in the sexual reproduction also, there is the involvement of two parents, one male and other female, right? So in this way, we we've talked about the mode of reproduction, that what are the different kinds or different modes of reproduction, and then we are going to understand about both of these modes in a little detail in the next session. In this session, we are going to talk about sexual reproduction in animals. Now, when we were talking about the sexual reproduction, we have already studied what exactly is sexual reproduction in plants. In that, we saw that there was formation of gametes. These gametes were male and female gametes, right? And in plants, we saw that the male parts, that is the male reproductive parts, produce the male gamete and the female reproductive parts produce the female gamete. If you remember, there were plants, those like your China rose, right? Then there were plants like papaya, right? All of these plants were the ones which reproduced sexually, and they had the male reproductive parts and the female reproductive parts. If you remember, in the flowers, we had stamen as the male reproductive part, right? As the male reproductive part, which produced male gamete, right? And we had pistil as the female reproductive part, right? Which produced egg, or we called it as female gamete, right? So also, what else we saw, that in the sexual reproduction, what was happening, that there was a fusion of male and female gamete, right? What did it produce? It produced one cell that was called as the zygote, and the reproduction started from that. So such kind of reproduction where the fusion of male and female gamete takes place is called as the sexual reproduction. This was something which we saw in the plants. Similar is the case with the animals also. In animals also, we have male reproductive parts and we have female reproductive parts. The difference between the plants and animals is that we have a whole organism which is completely male or a female, right? So there are, if we take an example from our daily life, so there are male dogs, there are female dogs. We have male elephants, female elephants. If we think in human beings, we have man and we have women. We have men and we have women. The reason is that men have male reproductive parts, whereas females, that is the women, have the female reproductive part. Here also the males of a particular species produce male gametes and females produce the female gamete. So in sexual reproduction, what exactly happens is that the male and female gamete fuse together to form the zygote. And the reproduction which starts from the fusion of male and female gamete is called as the sexual reproduction, right? So like I said, there is the formation of two different types of gamete in this kind of reproduction. When we say that there are two gametes that are being produced and there are two different reproductive organs, we are talking about the male reproductive organs and the female reproductive organs. Now, we are going to talk about male reproductive organs in human beings in detail, right? So, the diagram that you are able to see over here is the detailed structure of your male reproductive organ in your human beings, right? What we are going to study is what are the different parts of your male reproductive organs, what are their importance, and why are we talking about the male reproductive organ in human beings is because we need to understand from where do the male gamete is produced, right? So first of all, if we look at the diagram, there are three main parts. First we have the sperm duct. This is the sperm duct. Then we have the penis, and then we have the testis. So these are the three important parts of the male reproductive organs, right? So what is the importance of all these three parts? Let's understand that. First of all, the testes are, as you can see, there are two pairs. There are one pair of testes. That means total how many? There are two. Right, so over here you can see these are the testes that we are talking about. This testis is the one which will help in production of male gametes, right? So what do? They produce male gametes called as the sperm. So male gametes are called as the sperm in the case of your animals, right? So testis is the one which produces the male gametes. Also, in your further classes, you will study that testis is the one which produces, right? It produces male hormones also, right? You will study about this in detail further. But for now, it is important for us to understand that this is the organ which produces male gamete called as the sperm, right? So, as we've seen that testis produces male gamete which is called as the sperm, and in the production is in millions, right? So millions of sperms are produced by the testis, right? Then this is your first organ. Then the second organ is a pair of sperm ducts, right? So you can see this ducts are your tube-like structures, right? And then the third part is the penis, right? So what is the third part? This is the third part. Now we were talking about that the testis produces the male gamete called as the sperm. So let's understand that what is the structure of the sperm. Now this is what a sperm looks like. It is a single cell, right? Although it might look a little different than the normal cells that you see. We've already talked about that how cells are different from one another basing on their function, right? Even their shape and size are different. Similarly, the sperm is also a single cell which has a particular function. It has all the usual components of the cell, right? But there are three parts in which the whole sperm is divided. That is the head, we have the middle piece, and you have the tail, right? So now, if when we were talking about the cell, we said that the shape and the size of the cell was dependent on the function. Now you might wonder that what is the function of the tail in the case of sperm. Now the sperm actually travels through the female reproductive organ. When we are going to talk about the female reproductive organ, you'll be able to understand furthermore what is the significance of the tail. So this tail is helping the sperm to move inside the female reproductive organ, right, to reach the egg cell. Right now, if you remember, when we were talking about the definition of sexual reproduction, we said that the fusion of male and female gamete should take place, right? But the male gamete is present in the male reproductive system, and the female gamete is present in the female reproductive system. So when the sperm is released into the male female reproductive system, this tail helps in moving the sperm through it, and it reaches the ovum, right? So for now, it is important for you to understand that the sperm is divided into three parts. That is the head, you have the middle piece, and then you have the tail. It is quite small in the size is quite small, and at one time millions of sperms are produced, right? For now, also remember to memorize this diagram, because it is one of the most important diagrams whenever you are talking about the reproductive system. Not only in this class, but in further classes also, many a times questions are asked based on this particular diagram itself, right? So again, to understand this, we are going to go ahead and answer the question that Paheli has. And what is that? What purpose does the tail in a sperm serve? So tail helps in moving the sperm in the female reproductive organ. To reach female gamete, right? So in this way, we see that the male reproductive organ has basically three important parts. First is the pair of testes, then you have a pair of sperm duct, and third you have a penis. And in the testes, millions of sperms are produced. These sperms are transported through the sperm duct towards the penis, right? Further, you will study about the male reproductive system in further detail in your, in your other classes, higher classes. As of now, it is important for you to remember these three basic components of the male reproductive system. Then also remember the main three parts of the sperm, that is your head, middle piece, and your tail. Remember students, again I am repeating this, that the shape of the sperm depends on the kind of function that it is doing, right? So the tail serves a very, very important function, and it allows the movement of the sperm in female reproductive organ to reach the female gamete, that is ova, right? Now, once we've understood this, in this session, we are going to talk about female reproductive organs. In the previous session, we talked about the male reproductive organs, and we saw that the male reproductive organs mainly had three components, and the testes in the male reproductive organ produce the male gamete. Similarly, in the case of female reproductive organs also, there are three main organs that are involved. First is ovary. So when we talk about ovary, we have a pair. That means there are two ovaries, right? So you have one ovary over here, and you can see the other ovary right over here. Then the second part is the uterus, right? And the third part is your oviduct, also called as the fallopian tube. Always remember, both the names are quite important, because many a times the questions are asked, using the term fallopian tube instead of oviduct, right? So the function of all of these are quite different from each other. Ovary produces the egg or the female gamete. Right, so ovary produces the female gamete, which is called as the egg or the ova, right? Uterus is where the development of the baby takes place, right? So development of baby takes place in the uterus, and in oviduct fertilization occurs. We'll talk about this process in a little detail. as of now, we'll just understand what is the function of each of these organs, right? So we see that ovary is producing the mature female gamete. Now, in the case of males, we saw that the sperms were produced in millions, whereas in the case of female, a single ovum is released every month by either of the ovary. That is, we saw that there are two ovaries present in the female. So on one month, say first month, one of the ovaries, say the left ovary produce the or rather release the mature ovum. In the second month, what will happen? The right ovary will release the ovum. So in this way, one mature egg is released each month, right? Now you might wonder that where the release is taking place. So the egg that is released, it is released into the oviduct, right, or the fallopian tube. Now if you look at the diagram over here, so when the ovary is releasing your egg, it goes into the fallopian tube or the oviduct, and here only, as you can see, the fertilization takes place, right? So in this way, we see that only one mature egg is released as opposed to the millions of the sperms that are produced in the case of your male, right? Now over here, this is a diagram of your human ovum. As you can see, it's quite a big cell, and it has a nucleus in it, right? Remember students, the human ovum is again a single cell. Now as you can see, this cell is quite large, right, and it is one of the biggest cell that is present in the human beings, right? So human ovum is the biggest cell. Now when we were talking about the chapter cell, and over there also I had told you regarding when we were discussing the size of the cell, we said that ovum, human egg, is the largest cell that is present in the body, right? So always remember that it is a single cell which again contains a nucleus, and this human ovum is released every month, and it's only a single ovum that is released every month, right? Now let's move on and talk about the process of fertilization. But before that, Bujo recalls that the size of eggs in animal varies, right? The egg may be very small as in humans, much larger as in hens, and ostrich egg is the largest. So the size of the egg varies, right? Size of the egg varies. Now, why we are saying that human's egg is quite small? The reason is that human egg is microscopic. It is present inside the body of the female. Whereas in the case of hen, if we compare suppose this is your human egg, the hen's egg is quite large, and then the ostrich egg is the largest. And we've also studied that this is the largest cell also, right? If you remember, when we were talking about the shape and size of cell in the previous chapter, we said that ostrich egg was the largest, right? So there are different sizes of egg, and it varies from animal to animal. Now, once we've understood about the different components that are present in the female reproductive system and the female gametes, now let's move on and understand the process of fertilization. Now, when we were discussing the definition of your sexual reproduction, we said that there occurred the fusion of the male and female gametes. Even when we were talking about sexual reproduction in plants, we said that the male gamete of of one plant is going to fuse with the female gamete of the other plant, giving it produces one single cell called as the zygote. Similar phenomena happens in human beings as well, right? If you remember, the ovum that was released from the ovary went into the fallopian tube. So over there only it so happens that the fertilization takes place. So where it occurs? It occurs in the fallopian tube. The reason for that is that until the egg gets fertilized, it remains inside the fallopian tube, right? So what exactly happens is, the very first step in the case of sexual reproduction is the fusion of sperm and ovum, right? This is the very first step which happens. And what exactly happens is, now you might wonder that we said that sperm was a single cell, ovum also was a single cell. So when there is a fusion, you might wonder that there might be two cells that might be present after the fusion, after the fertilization. But this is not the case. We've already discussed that sperm is again a cell which contains all the components of your cell, a normal cell. Similarly, ovum is also a single cell which contains all the components. That is, sperm also contains a nucleus and ovum also contains a nucleus. So what exactly happens during the fusion is that the nucleus of sperm fuses with the nucleus of ovum, right? So both the nucleus fuse together, giving the or forming a single cell called as the zygote, right? So this is the formation of zygote. The fertilization is represented over here. Now, like I said, the sperms have the tails which allow them to move within the reproductive organ of the females, and only one sperm fertilizes the ovum, which is present in the fallopian tube. So over here also you can see that this particular sperm is able to fertilize. So what happens, the nucleus which is present in the head moves inside and gets fused with the nucleus of the ovum. Once this happens, a new cell, single cell called as the zygote is formed. So what is it? It is a single cell, right? So in this way over here you see how the fusion occurs, and how although there are two cells which are fusing together, but only one cell is formed, because it's only the nucleus of these cells that come together, that fuse together, forming a new cell called as the zygote, right? And this process is called as the fertilization. So if we have to define the process of fertilization, what we'll say that the fusion of the male and the female gamete is called as the fertilization, or the fusion of the nucleus of the sperm and the nucleus of the ovum giving rise to a zygote, that is the single cell, is called as the fertilization, right? When we are talking about zygote, we see that this is the very first cell of your of an individual. That means the formation of a whole individual starts with this single cell called as the fertilization. It is the beginning of the new individual. A better representation of zygote formation is seen in this particular picture, where you can see that this is the human egg, that is the ovum, and this nucleus over here and this nucleus of the sperm is fusing together to form a zygote, right? Now, this process where the human sperm that is released or received from the father and human egg that is received from the mother fuses occurs in the oviduct or the fallopian tube, right? This is where the fusion occurs, and this is the reason why over here you can see that some of the nucleus from the mother is fusing from the nucleus of the father, and we've already seen that within the nucleus there is the presence of chromosomes, and in these chromosomes there is the presence of genes. And if you remember, we talked that genes were the unit of inheritance. That means genes had the characteristics or the information regarding what the characteristics would be, right? So genes are the ones which will dictate the kind of characteristic that is going to be developing inside a particular organism. So when the genes, when the nucleus of the father and the nucleus of the mother fuses, the genes also come together. That is, the gene of the father and the gene of the mother is coming together, and thus what happens is that the offspring inherits the characteristics of both mother and the father, right? So in this way, and this is one of the reason why that you resemble, some of your characters will resemble your father and some of your characters will resemble your mother. The reason is the fusion of the nucleus of the male and the female gamete, right? So in this way we see that how the fusion takes place and how the characters of the offsprings are determined. Now over here you can see that the fertilization of the male and female gamete is taking place within the body of the female, right? All of this is happening in the oviduct, which is inside the body of the female. Such kind of fertilization which occurs in the body of the female is called as internal fertilization, right? This kind of fertilization occurs in the body of the female, right? Body of female. So the examples are where this fertilization takes place, that is internal fertilization. Examples are human beings, right? Dogs, cats, hens, right? So all of these, cows, all of these are the example of the internal fertilization, right? Now, once we have studied about the process of fertilization, once we've understood what exactly happens in the fertilization process, now let's talk about a particular kind of fertilization which occurs with the help of modern technology, and this is in vitro fertilization. Now this technique is utilized by the females where they might have some blockage in the fallopian tubes. Now, like I've already discussed that the fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube. There are some females, there are some women who have certain kinds of blockage in the fallopian tube, and the reason and the result of that blockage is that the sperm is not able to reach the the ovum that is released and is present in the fallopian tube. In such females, the pregnancy, that means the fertilization, is not able to occur naturally because of these blockage that might be there. So in vitro fertilization is a modern technique which helps in these females to conceive. What exactly happens in this particular method is first of all, the egg is retrieved from the ovary, right? So the production of the egg is stimulated by certain hormones. We'll study in detail that there are different kinds of hormones which which stimulate the release of the egg, right? Whenever we see that in the natural course of our life also, in the females, when the egg is released every month, there are certain hormones which help in this process. So in this case also, certain hormones are given to the females to retrieve eggs, right? Once the eggs are retrieved from the ovary, then what happens is the other step is to get the male gamete. Once we've got the female gamete, the sperm sample is taken from the father. That is, it is taken from this male gamete is taken from the father. Now what happens is that both the sperm sample and the egg is kept together, and what happens is that the fertilization takes place outside in a petri dish in a lab environment, right? Then what happens is when the fertilization occurs, then the development of the zygote takes place, right? So after fertilization, we see zygote is formed, and this single cell starts dividing, right? It starts dividing. As you can see, it keeps on developing. Now once it reaches a particular stage, right? Once it reaches a stage where the development can now take place within the body of the female, what happens is that this is taken, this particular stage, this zygote which has reached a particular stage is taken and is embedded in the uterus. Now what stage is this? We'll study further when we are talking about the development of the baby inside the body, inside the female body. But as of now, it is important for you to understand that this technique is an artificial technique. It is used by the doctors for the people, those who are, especially for the females, where the fallopian tubes has certain kind of blockage and the sperm is not able to reach the ovum for the fertilization. So in this case, with the help of the doctors, with their assistants, the fertilization occurs outside, and then after the development of the zygote to a certain stage, it is introduced in the uterus of the female, and further development occurs within the body of the female. Once the gestation period is over, the female gives birth naturally. Now, because this particular type of fertilization, this development is taking place in the labs, many a times people also called baby born by this process as test tube baby, which is quite misleading because you cannot develop a baby in a test tube. The reason we people call it as test tube baby, because the fertilization and certain processes are taking place within the lab. But the right term is in vitro fertilization, because this is the term which is showing that the fertilization is occurring within the lab, right? You should not get confused of this, you should not get confused that whether or not this kind of fertilization is an external fertilization. Please do not get confused. When we'll talk about external fertilization, you will understand that the division of internal, or the classification of the internal and the external fertilization, is based on the natural process, and this is what it is, an artificial process which is taking place, right? It is what? It is an artificial process, right? So it's a medical, you can say it's a medical procedure, right? So now, once we've understood what exactly is in vitro fertilization and what do we mean by internal fertilization, now let's look at another type of fertilization called as the external fertilization. In such kind of fertilization, the fertilization occurs outside the female body. To understand this in a better way, we're going to perform a simple activity where you are going to visit some ponds or slow flowing streams. I would suggest that please go with a group of your friends under the guidance of teacher or your parents. And what you're going to do is you're going to visit these ponds or slow flowing streams in spring season or rainy season. And what you're going to look is, you're going to look at the cluster of frogs' egg floating in the water, and it looks something like this. This picture will help you in recognizing the cluster of frogs' eggs. What you're going to observe is the color and the size of the eggs. What do they look like, right? Now, as you can see that this cluster of egg is formed outside the female body. If you remember, when we were talking about the fertilization in human beings, we said the fusion took place within the body and zygote was formed, and the development was also happening inside the body. This is not the case in the frog, right? You can see the clusters are present outside the female body. Whenever we are talking about external fertilization, the importance of water is very, very important. All the aquatic organisms, right, or any organism which is going under, or in which organism the external fertilization is taking place, it requires presence of water. Why is it so? Let's understand by understanding the process of external fertilization in the frogs. Now, usually the fertilization in the frogs occur during the rainy season. Why? Because that is the season where the ponds and the slow flowing streams are full. And during rainy season only, you must have seen frogs, if you look at around you during the summer and during the winter season, you will not find the presence of frogs. But during the rainy or the spring season, you will find the presence of frog around you. They come out and they go to the slow flowing streams, or they go to the pond, right, for the process of reproduction, right? The frogs and toads alike, right? Now, what happens exactly is that when the male and the female come together in the water, the female lays hundreds of eggs, right? So it lays hundreds of eggs. right? And in the if when we look at the hen's egg, right, both hen as well as the frog or the toad is producing egg. In the case of the female, the eggs that they are laying is, in the case of female frog, the eggs that are laying are not covered with the hard covering as we saw the case in your hens. They are covered with a jelly like substance, right? They are covered by jelly that holds the egg together, right? Now over here also holds the egg together. Now over here also you can see that there is this jelly like substance. When you will observe the eggs also, you will see that the cluster that they are forming is because of the jelly that is holding these eggs together, right? So at one time the female frog can lay hundreds of eggs in the water. Now what happens is that when the eggs are laid, the males produce, or males deposit sperms over them, deposits the sperms over them, right? Once hundreds of the eggs are produced, the sperms are laid over them. What happens after that the sperm will come in contact with the egg that is being, or the ovum that is produced by the female, and they get fertilized outside the body, right? Now sperm, again, the sperms of the egg, of the frog also has tails, which allows them to move in the water and helps them to move near the female egg, right? Once the fertilization takes place, over here we see that the formation of the eggs is happening, and within those eggs the development of the baby starts. So this kind of fertilization, where the fertilization is occurring outside the female body, is called as the external fertilization. To understand this, to understand this whole process, I'll repeat it again, that during the rainy and the summer season, when the male and female partners, that is the frog, whether it is in the frog or in toad, they come together, the female lays hundreds of eggs, right? And unlike the hen or the ostrich, these eggs are quite delicate because they are not protected with the hard shell. Instead, they are protected, or they are covered with the jelly-like substance which is holding these eggs together. Once the eggs are laid, the sperm is deposited by the male over these eggs. These sperms have tails which help them to move towards these eggs within the water, and once they reach the egg, they fertilize it, right? And this kind of fertilization which occurs outside the body, right, this kind of fertilization which occurs outside the female body is called as the external fertilization. So apart from frog and toad, there are certain fish which also produce by external fertilization. You have starfish also, which is producing by external fertilization, and there are various other aquatic animals which are the reproduction or the fertilization is occurring outside the female body. Understand, in the external fertilization, the need or the presence of water is really important, right? Now let's move on and answer a particular question which you also might be thinking, that why do fish and frog lay eggs in hundreds, whereas hen lay only one egg at a time? So maximum, if we think about it, the fishes and the frogs, like I already told you, they are laying hundreds of eggs, whereas when we are talking about hen, at one time it lays one egg, and the reason is because of the way the egg is protected. If we talk about the eggs of the hen, they are covered with a hard shell. They are protected by the hard shell, and even the hen incubates it sits and takes care of the egg. But in the case of fishes and eggs, they are not covered with the hard shell, but they are only having jelly like substances. Suppose there are, say, hundreds of eggs laid by a frog, right? And out of which, due to one or the other reason, there can be environmental reasons, there can be predators who might eat up the egg, there can be various reasons. Out of these 100, only say 50 of the eggs have the opportunity to get fertilized, right? Because rest of the 50 might come under the influence, or they might face any adverse condition because of which they are destroyed. So this gives the chance of the survival of at least 50 of the eggs, and these 50 eggs can be fertilized. If there were only say 10 eggs, what would happen? That only 5 or say only 4 or even 1 egg will be fertilized. So this will the chances of getting the eggs fertilized is quite low in the case of your egg fishes and frogs. Reason again is because they are exposed to the environmental conditions, they are exposed to the your predators, right? And that's the reason why the number of eggs are in hundreds, so that at least few of them should get fertilized because with the help of the sperm, right? And this is the reason why the fishes and frog lay eggs in hundreds, whereas hen will lay egg one at a time, right? So again, this is the same thing which Paheli explained. I'll just read it out to you so that you are able to understand it clearly. So these animals lay hundreds of eggs and release millions of sperm. All the eggs do not get fertilized and develop into new individuals, right? Some of the eggs and sperm get exposed to water movement, wind and rainfall, that is the environmental conditions. Also, there are other animals in the pond which may feed on the eggs. Thus, production of large number of egg and sperm is necessary to ensure fertilization of at least a few of them. So, out of these 100, maybe it ensures that if there are 500 eggs, so at least 200 of them would get fertilized. That is why production of egg in huge number is important in such animals. So in this way, students, we talked about the female reproductive organ and the process of fertilization. In the previous session, we talked about the female reproductive system and we talked about how the fertilization takes place. Now, we are going to talk about the stages after the fertilization. Once the fertilization has taken place, what happens to the zygote that has been formed, right? So, what we are going to study is the development of embryo. And this is what the question Bujo has. He wants to know how could a single cell become such a big individual. So the single cell that he is talking about is the zygote that is formed by the fusion of the nucleus of the male and the female gamete, right? When this fusion occurs, a single cell called as the zygote is formed. He wants to know from this single zygote, how do such big individuals are formed, whether we talk about human beings or we talk about a huge elephant, all of these individuals are formed by a single cell. So, let's answer the question that Bujo is asking and understand the whole process. So, the development of embryo, how does it happen in the human beings? First of all, after the fertilization, we see that the formation of zygote takes place. Then from the zygote, the development takes place. The zygote keeps on dividing, and embryo is formed. Right now, if you look at this image over here, we have a representation which will help us in understanding how does the whole development that is taking place. First of all, if you look over here, this is the ovum that is released by the ovary. Now, when this ovum is released, it goes into the fallopian tube, that is the oviduct, and gets fertilized, and the zygote formation takes place. After the zygote has formed, it is a single cell at this point. Then it keeps on dividing into 2 cells, then 4, then 8, and then it reaches a stage where it looks like a mass of or the ball of cells, right? So how does it look like? It looks like a ball of cells. This ball of cells further begins to form and develop into different parts. Now, once this ball of cell is formed at this stage, what happens? It goes and it gets embedded into the uterus, right? This ball of cell, as you can see, is now descending into the uterus, which has already prepared itself for receiving this ball of cell. Once it now understand, while this ball of cell is moving into the uterus, it keeps on dividing, right? And it divides in such a way that now various you can see that how the balls have arranged itself, if the cells have arranged itself to form the different parts of the body, right? And this is what this developing structure which you are seeing is called as the embryo. And this embryo gets embedded in the uterus wall, right, where further development takes place, right? So from here you can see that the ovum is released, the fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube, that is in the oviduct. Zygote formation takes place, then it keeps on dividing and forms a ball of cells. This ball of cell begins further forming groups of the different cells. We've already studied, while we were studying the cell, that the group of cells form tissue, right? And the group of tissue starts forming organs, right? So this is the beginning of it all. Once the ball of cell is formed, then what happens? It starts to form the group of cells, right? And then this group of cells start forming tissues and organs of the body. Now over here, when the ball of cell is in this phase, it gets embedded. As you can see over here, it starts getting embedded in the uterus wall, which has already prepared itself to receive the embryo. Once the embedding is complete, then what happens? The embryo keeps on developing in the uterus, right? Now it gradually develops the body, and it slowly starts developing the different organs that are utilized or that are present in the human body, right? So from the embryo, now the different ones, like you've seen that cell, after the cell, tissue formation takes place, and after the tissue formation, organ formation takes place. So this all of this development is going on in the embryo, which is already embedded in the uterus, right? Now at the stage where you can observe the hand, legs, you can observe the hand, legs, and all the different parts, that stage is called as the fetus, right? So stage where you are able to observe different parts, that is your hands, legs, heads, eye, ear, etc. This stage of the body where all the parts of the this stage of the development where all the parts of the body are now recognizable is known as the fetus. Now further, the development of fetus takes place, and this fetus develops into a fully grown baby. Once the baby is developed, what happens next is that the mother is able to give birth. In human beings, this whole process of development takes 9 months, right? In 9 months, from a single zygote, the development of the baby takes place. So over here you can see that how the single cell zygote give rise to a fully formed baby, right? So from zygote, the next stage is embryo. From embryo, it is fetus, and from the fetus, it is baby, right? Over here you can see, in this case, you can see how the development of the baby takes place. Over here you can see that the embryo is now developing and is attached to the uterus wall. From this uterus wall, it obtains all the nutrition that it requires with the help of the mother's body, and this uterus wall is something which provides all the nutrition and assist in the development of the baby, right? So again, let's understand, from zygote, the embryo is formed, which gets embedded in the uterus. From the embryo, fetus is formed, and from the fetus a full grown baby is formed, and after that the gestation period is complete and the mother gives birth to the baby. So fetus looks something like this inside the uterus, right? So this is a uterus which is covered, which has various layers which will help in keeping the baby protected from any kind of germ. And after the full development of the baby, that is after 9 months, the mother gives birth to the child, right? So in this way we see the development of human beings from a single cell to a full grown baby. Now when we talk about hens, we saw that in hens what was happening, that the the hen were laying eggs, right? We said first of all that hens also have internal fertilization. That means the fusion of the male and female gamete takes place within the body of the hen. Now you might wonder that over here in human beings case, the whole development of the baby is taking place within the body of the mother, and the mother is giving birth to the child, right, a young one. But in the case of hen, if we are saying the fertilization is taking place in the body, how does the birth take place? So to understand that, let's see how does birth in hens take place. So once the internal fertilization is complete, then what happens is, in the case of human beings, we saw that after the internal fertilization, zygote formation takes place and the zygote descends into the uterus. It goes from the fallopian tube towards the uterus and it keeps on dividing. In the case of hens, what happens is that the zygote, as it is traveling down the oviduct, over here also the travel of the zygote is taking place, and as it is moving through the oviduct, the division of the zygote is taking place, as we saw in the case of human beings, right? So here also the division is taking place. Now as it is traveling down the oviduct, what is the difference? That so as it is traveling down the oviduct, the difference is there is a formation of protective layering, right? So in the case of human beings, no such protective layering was being formed, but over here on these ball of cells which are being developed from the zygote, the protective layering is being formed, right? So this is what it is, the protective layering. This protective layering is the hard shell that you are able to see, right? Now once the whole once the zygote is traveling from the oviduct towards down towards when it is the zygote is traveling down from the oviduct, what is happening? The zygote is dividing, and at one stage also, while it is dividing, it is being covered by protective layering which forms the hard shell, right? And within this hard shell there is the presence of embryo, right? Now if you remember, the embryo in the human beings was getting attached to the uterus, but in this case what is happening, this egg is being laid out. This, as you can see in this diagram, this is the egg which contains embryo in it, right? So this is the egg containing embryo, right? So once the protective layering is formed on the developing embryo, the hen finally lays the egg. But the work of the hen is not finished yet, because once it has laid egg, it needs warmth for the development. So what the you can see that and not only in hens, in many birds you will see that they sit on their eggs to provide warmth, right? So why do they provide warmth? Because there is an embryo that is developing inside the body, inside the hard shell, right? So the hens sit on the, right? So hens sit on the egg, right, to provide warmth. Sit on the egg to provide warmth, right? Once once the this process is complete, the chick comes out of the egg by breaking the hard shell from within. This whole process takes 3 months, right? In the case of human beings, it was 9 months. In the case of hens, it was 3 months, right? So in this way, the egg is being laid. Now, development of chick takes place inside the hard shell in the egg during the whole period. Now, once, like I said, if the whole embryo is developed, then what happens is that the baby, that is the chick, comes out by breaking the shell. Again, students, remember that it also has the same stages as we saw in the human beings. The only difference was that the whole or the complete development of the baby was taking place inside the womb of the mother, whereas in the case of hens, it is taking place inside the egg. So what is happening? The zygote and embryo and fetus and then the chick, all of these 4 stages are present in the birth of hens also, right? Now, this was the case where the internal fertilization was taking place. When we are talking about the external fertilization, over there we are seeing that there is no protection of the parents over there. In the case of internal fertilization, what was happening, whether it was in the case of hens or it was in the case of human beings, in hen also, the hen protects its egg, it keeps, provides warmth and take cares of the baby until they are born and even after it. But in the case of external fertilization, what is happening, that the fertilization is happening outside the female body, and each and every stage, all of these stages that are these animals are going through is outside the female's body, right? So in the case of, say, frog, what is happening, that within that gel like structure where we've seen that the outer covering of the egg which was there, which was the gel like structure, inside that the development of the frog's egg is taking place, the embryo is developing, and after a certain period of time, from those eggs the tadpoles, they come out, right? So basically, within the covering of the egg, that is the gel like covering of the egg, the embryo keep on growing, and after some times the tadpoles come out of those eggs, which further develop into the frogs, right? So as you can see, like we had discussed in the very first session, we said that in human beings, the baby is in humans, the young one is called as baby. In hens, the young one is called as chick, whereas the young one of the frog is a tadpole, right? So in this way, we see how the internal and external fertilization is also one of the factors which determine that what kind of parenting will be seen, right? In the internal fertilization, we see that up to a certain period of time, the mother is taking care of the baby, whereas in the case of external fertilization, no such thing is seen, right? Now over here at this point, we are going to distinguish 2 kinds of birth. One is the animals that give birth to the young ones, right? These are called as the viviparous animals. Then there are certain animals which give birth to, or they lay eggs, right? These kind of animals are called as the oviviparous, right? So viviparous animals are the ones which will give birth to the young ones. Over here you will see that they give birth to the young ones, right? Whereas oviviparous are the ones which will lay eggs. What are the examples? We see that the birds, reptiles like snakes, and your tortoise, and various fishes which are going external fertilization, all of these lay eggs. In the case of young ones, we see the examples as humans, dogs, cats, and so on. And that's the reason why in the market, if you go, you will find the egg of the duck, hen, turkey, but you will not find an egg of a dog or a cat or even a human being, because the development is completely inside the female body, whereas over here a little bit of development is taking place outside the female body, right? Now Once we have understood this, now let's move on and perform an activity where it's a very simple activity where you have to observe the eggs of frog, lizard, butterfly, moth, hen, crow, or any other bird. Now you will, when you are able to observe the egg, you are going to see where did you find those eggs, and you can also make the drawings. Now already we have seen the frog's egg are found in the slow flowing streams and ponds, whereas when we talk about, say, the butterflies, these are the eggs of the butterfly, right? And these are found under the butterflies. These are found under the leaves. So if you have to search for the eggs of the butterfly, you should always look under the sea. Butterfly lays eggs such that they get stuck to the lower part of the leaf. So what you're going to do is you're going to observe the eggs and you can make the drawings. This will help you in understanding the difference between the eggs, and you are also able to understand the area where the egg has been laid, right? Now, once a child has been born, say in human beings, when the baby is born, the development of it takes place from young baby to an adult, right? The development that takes place includes the growth, it includes the growth in the height, changes in the body, various kind of changes that you can see. But there are certain kinds of animals where the changes are quite drastic. Here we have taken an example of the life cycle of a frog, right? Of a frog, and we have taken the example of life cycle of a butterfly. If you remember, when we were talking about in the very first session, when we said that there are certain organisms whose the young one is quite different in the looks, or if you look at this caterpillar, you will never be able to imagine that it will change into a butterfly, right? Because it looks like a worm. So this is what we had discussed in the beginning, that there are certain young ones who are exactly dissimilar, or they are exactly the opposite. You might not even think until you have studied that these two organisms are related, right? And this particular, say, a tadpole is one of the cycles or one of the stages of the life cycle of the frog, until you know about it, right? In such such kind of development which is so drastic that each stage is so different from each other is called as the metamorphosis. Let's study and understand this with these two examples. When we talk about the young ones of when we talk about the life cycle of a frog, the very first part of the life cycle is the egg mass, which we had observed, right? So the egg mass is laid in an aquatic environment in the pond or a slow flowing stream. The embryo development takes place within the egg mass, and once the embryo is developed into a baby frog, right, then this baby frog is called as the tadpole, right? So after the egg, the next stage is the tadpole. Now if you look at the tadpole and look at the adult frog, you will see how drastically they are different. The tadpole looks like a fish, right? And even it has gills, right? So tadpole even has gills for the for breathing within the water. Then what happens? The development takes place, and there you will find the tadpole with legs. Now here you can start seeing a little bit of resemblance with the frog. Then you will see a young frog which has a hint of tail, a little bit of tail left. Then there is the formation of the adult frog where no tail is seen. So as you can see, each stage is different from each other. So there is so drastic change that you cannot associate this tadpole with this frog, right? And such kind of development where each stage is, the changes are so drastic, right? Such kind of development is called as metamorphosis. Again, if we look at the life cycle of a butterfly, that from the eggs there is a caterpillar stage, right? And from the caterpillar stage there is a pupa stage. This is the stage where the caterpillar builds a covering around itself and the development takes place. From this pupa, after some time, the butterfly comes out, right? Now, same kind of life cycle is seen in silkworm also. Now the silkworm is a worm which is utilized by human beings to produce silk. Similar is the life cycle of the silkworm also, where the egg is laid by a moth. Basically, the silkworm develops into a moth, right? Then there is a stage where the silkworm is seen. After the silkworm, the pupa is formed. Now, this pupa of the silkworm is formed with the fibers that are silk, which we utilize, right? And from this pupa stage only, we derive all the silk that we are using. If the pupa is left as it is, then the moth will come out, right? So this is what happens in the case of silkworm. Now over here also you can see that how drastic is the change from one stage to the other. This is the reason why the development of puppies, the development of kittens, calves, or even human babies is not categorized under metamorphosis, because if you look at a baby of a dog, if you look at a puppy, if you look at a kitten, easily you can say that this particular animal is the young one of this particular dog. Even the breed you can determine, right? So if you look at a puppy, you will say that this breed is of, or this puppy is of a Labrador, this puppy is of a German Shepherd. They are so similar to their parents. There is no drastic change which is coming, and that's why the development of human babies also is not considered as metamorphosis, right? So this is how the young ones are developed into the adults, and there are different ways, right? So this kind of development is called as metamorphosis, right? Now, I hope you were able to understand the whole development process and the different ways in which development of young ones takes place in different organisms. Now, let's move on and answer some questions.